What's going on, everyone? Good morning. Welcome to the Pizza Buffet, live here on Forward Progress, part of the Hammer Betting Network, and proudly presented by Fanduel. I'm Rob Pizzola in Toronto, just outside of Toronto. Snowed in, little hungover. Woke up this morning, said, you know what? Comfy's going on. Going to watch a bunch of football, going to talk some football. Hopefully, it'll be a great few days. We're diving into wildcard weekend. 6 games spanning 3 days. Playoff football's here. It is a different beast altogether. For those that don't know, hyper-efficient market where if you're betting right now, especially on sides or totals, I would say it should be more about enhancing the excitement rather than expecting to turn a profit. We all want to win, but at this point, we got some pretty big limits at a lot of books, and I'll do what I can to break down the sides and totals in the games, but bet responsibly with all this stuff. Unlike week 18, I will go back to sharing my model numbers for each game this week. I'll walk you through my thoughts on the matchups, the betting angles I find interesting, and some props that stand out to me as well. Good morning to all of you in the chat. Ekshesh, good morning to you. Jack Weidman, Frank Davis, Brinks, Redacted, Carlos, Clueless Better, a lot of you in here that are regulars. Good to see you in here this morning. Audience participation is a big part of what makes these shows very fun for me to do. So feel free to share your questions throughout, your thoughts, your leans in the chat, anything that you want. Well, we probably won't have much breaking news during the show today. If you do see something, please post it in the chat as I'm going to be focused on these game breakdowns. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and please share this video out on socials. This is the one time a year where, yes, I'm doing this leading into a Saturday afternoon game, which isn't starting for several hours. But if you do share this out, at least we can get some additional viewership leading into Sunday and Monday. Your support helps the channel grow. Really appreciate it. To wildcard weekend, and we're going to go in order of the games this weekend, starting with the Chargers and the Texans. Chargers-Texans, pretty interesting matchup here, and a decent amount of market movement on this game over the course of the week. I'm pretty close to, I'm right on market, I guess you would say, with the side now. I'll speak to that in a second. Total got bet down yesterday as well. So looking at FanDuel now, we're still at a very expensive 3 on the Houston Texans. In this moment, a lot of the sharp books have moved off of the 3 down to 2.5. Yesterday, there was a Right Angle Sports release on the under in this game as well, which honestly, I don't necessarily agree with. I think probably created a little bit of value towards the over with where we stand now at 41.5. But that's why the market move happened yesterday in this game. From a matchup perspective, Chargers play. We'll start with the Houston offense here. The Chargers play a lot of light boxes. They've been able to usually stop the run out of those light boxes this year. At least they have been when Denzel Perryman is playing. Denzel Perryman officially listed as questionable today. Looking at the injury report right now, he did get in 2 full practices. He's probably back with his groin injury. I don't think there's anyone major that you're watching out for on the Chargers side except for Jasir Taylor. And I wouldn't call him major, but a corner that's doubtful to play for the Chargers today. But I think the Chargers' run defense stuff is a little bit misleading. When you break down their schedule, there's a lot of intricacies that you start to notice when they take a step up in class or a step down in class. And that's not just the team that they're playing, but also positional groups. And of course, this happens across the NFL, right? If you're going to play good running backs, you're more likely to give up more yardage on the ground or vice versa. But when we look at the Chargers, there's a very clear dichotomy. When they've played what I would consider to be quality running backs this year, they've actually got torched on the ground. And whenever they've played weaker running games, they've done a very good job of keeping that in check. So remains to be seen what Houston can do here on the ground. I know a lot of people talk about like all this early down running for the Texans. I made note of this on the Best Bet show earlier this week, but it's not really all that much early down running anymore. In fact, it's completely flipped to a lot of early down passing since week 12. So really challenging to figure out what's going to happen here with Houston. But I do think Mixon has been a very quality back this year, and they have the opportunity to move the ball. Texans offense will drive you crazy. You watch a lot of their games, it's inconsistent. They're in a lot of long down and distances. A lot of that is offensive holding penalties. It's play calling. It's bad scheme. I don't really know what you're going to get on a Houston offense on a week to week from the Houston offense on a week to week basis. And I think there's a very wide range of what the offense can be for the Texans. But it comes down to me will they be able to run the ball on the Chargers? I don't know. Lots of uncertainty there. The other side of things, you have this Chargers offense led by Justin Herbert. Herbert is great. I still think somehow underrated in the league, but coming in off of relatively easy opponents in the Raiders and Patriots and looked great in those games, but this will be a different animal because for one, the Texans actually have a very good cornerback group. Derek Stingley pretty much going to shut down whoever he plays against. Kamari Lassiter, very underrated. They have two very good edge rushers in Daniil Hunter and Will Anderson. Now, that's strength on strength because the Chargers O-line has two very good tackles. But it is going to be challenging for Chargers receivers to get open in this game, in my opinion. They'll move McConkey around a lot. They'll operate as much slot for McConkey as possible to get him away from the best corners on the Texans. But ultimately, this is where the Texans defense has a big advantage. And if you want to make the argument for why the under might have taken some money in this game from RAS, it's probably because Houston has the ability to shut down these Chargers receivers. Quentin Johnson had a great game last week. Is that going to continue going forward? Well, we've seen it one time. So it's going to be tough. XF says Lassiter on McConkey, advantage Houston. I don't know advantage Houston necessarily, but I don't think it's necessarily McConkey running wild like we've seen all year. Just from outside of a matchup perspective, I do think the spot kind of matters for Houston in that people tend to overrate or overvalue certain spots. They'll be like, oh, this team's playing on short rest. Well, you can quantify what the short rest is worth. And like nowadays, it's not a lot. But this is third straight road game for the Chargers, and it's a short week of travel for them as well. I do think that is somewhat impactful for this particular game. And also, I don't know where you bucket the Texans into like good or bad, but the Chargers had this very, very predictable season where they play a team that's worse than them. They beat them down. They step up in class. They struggle in those particular games. It's a really challenging handicap. I do think that the number in the game is fair. If you ask me to pick, I would pick the Texans. Obviously, if you're doing stale line pools, it's a no-brainer if you get Texans 3 and stuff like that. But at current market, it would lean Texans. It would lean over. Don't think that there's a ton to do here. From a props perspective, let me take a quick look at the board, and I'll do this for every single game as I see it happen. I did notice there was one particular player that I thought I saw the number. I'm like, it's a little bit low. It's been bet up a bit this morning, but not to a range where I think that the value is all gone. And that's Robert Woods in the receiving yardage category, which right now at FanDuel's 11.5. Looking across the board, you have some 10.5s. You have some 9.5 juiced over out there as well. Robert Woods is not going to get a ton of run in this game. You look at the receiving options. Nico Collins obviously going to be on the field for like 80 to 90% of snaps, as is Xavier Hutchinson. John Mechie coming in with a pre-existing injury. That matters with the potential of him not playing a full game necessarily. But Robert Woods, even if you remove week 18, he's kind of been on the field for roughly 40 to 50% of snaps for the Texans. It's a pretty low number. He's been getting targets in recent games as well. I like Robert Woods here. Aside from that, not a lot going on for me. I do think that there's an avenue for the Chargers to attack the middle of the field. Joey asks if it's a Disley game. It very much could be, but I think his numbers are priced appropriately based off of that. XS makes a good point here. Herbert rushing yards is priced as if he wasn't playing injured for 13 games. I agree. I'm not going to be the guy that's like blindly bet all these overs for quarterbacks. But Herbert is likely to come under duress in this game, which I think means he's going to have to use his legs a little bit more. I do agree that the pricing is a little bit suppressed based off of season-long data where he has been hurt for a lot of that. So completely agree with that. I do like that look as well. So listen, you might hear me say this a lot today. It's not a cop-out. I'm just going to talk about the games, but I don't think that there's a ton to do with this early one. And per usual, I'll be pretty invested in watching a lot of these playoff games, seeing how things are going early and firing out some bets if things are not looking good for the Texans early on in this one. Okay. Second game is the night game. We have the Steelers and the Ravens. Third time this year. Baltimore, pretty substantial favorite, 9.5, right to left, across the board, left to right, however you want to put it. Total in the game, 43.5 Fanduel, 43.5 at a few other books. Market is kind of split between 43.5 and 44, which is kind of important because 44 is a key number here. Marcus noticed I said right to left across the board, left to right. I do listen to Simple Handicap. Sorry, Chernoff, stole that completely from you. Okay, you see my numbers directionally lean towards the Steelers. I talked about the Steelers on Forward Progress this week. I don't want to call it best bets because we didn't really give out best bets, but we talked about the game a lot. And directionally, I think the Steelers are the right side here. We'll start with the Baltimore offense. Zay Flowers is out. He has been a huge focal point of this offense. When you look at target share for the Ravens, he has 44 more targets than the next highest player on the team. And not having him there, yes, the Ravens have a lot of weapons. Of course, they're still capable of moving the ball. They have a good running game. They have really good tight ends. They will utilize more 2 tight end sets, 12 personnel today as well. There's a lot going on here. But this gives the Steelers a route to playing a lot more man coverage and stacking the box a little bit more than they would have been able to do if Flowers wasn't there. They get Dante Jackson back at corner. And listen, the Steelers cornerback group is not great, but you're looking at this relative to the Ravens wide receiver group, and all of a sudden, it's a decent matchup. All of a sudden, corners can come down, safeties can come down to the line of scrimmage a little bit more and try to shut down this running game at all costs. Will they be successful doing that? Honestly, it's extremely possible that that's the case, because we have seen over the course of several years that Mike Tomlin does a much better job against Lamar than most teams around the league. It's happened. There's evidence to support that. In fact, there's evidence to support that the more you see Lamar as a quarterback, the better you tend to fare against him, because he's a very dynamic player. You learn the stuff over time. So I don't want to say I like the matchup for the Steelers defense, but not having Flowers there fundamentally changes things for them. If we go back to the last matchup between these two teams, it's not like Baltimore had this hyper-efficient offensive game. By EPA, it was a below-average game for them. Yes, you'll look at the final score, you'll see 34 points. It's a little bit misleading. There was a pick six at the end of that game in that matchup. There is an opportunity for success for the Steelers D. I would say Baltimore still fairly likely to be able to find ways to move the ball, but I don't think it's a clear-cut juggernaut offensive performance for the Ravens here. The bigger concern for me is on the other side, because we've had Pittsburgh dealing with an offense that has completely come down to earth. And the biggest thing I see with the Steelers offense is that they have no intermediate passing game. They have a short passing game, They occasionally take some shots deep. They have nothing in the intermediate game. That's kind of been Russell Wilson's entire career, to be honest. But if you look at both games against the Ravens this year, Pittsburgh had 24 drives. They only got into the red zone on 25% of those drives, 6 of them. So they've had challenges moving the ball against this defense. Now they do get George Pickens back, who didn't play in the last game between these two teams. He did play last week. He wasn't a factor against Cincinnati. Okay, he is a pretty big factor for the offense altogether. I mean, there's a massive difference in EPA and success rate when he's on the field versus when he is not. So I don't anticipate that the Steelers are going to move the ball, uber successfully in this game, but they did go up and down the field in the first half against Baltimore last game. It's this has been talked about a lot, but Russell Wilson fumbled inside the 5-yard line on a big scramble in that game. It really changed things. Flipped that game on its head. I think this is too many points. When you look at the way that these teams have been valued for a long time now, it seems like too many points. When you look at the Steelers' decline in the last month, they've had injuries to Alex Highsmith, to Joey Porter, to Larry Ogunjobi, Dante Jackson, Deshaun Elliott, George Pickens, even Justin Fields, who hurts them in like some short yardage stuff as well. And looking at the injury report today, other than Mason McCormick on the O-line, who is expected to play with a hand injury, full complement. So I think the number's a little bit too big. Now, I made it close to 8. I think just shy of 8. Number's 9.5. That's not a super valuable bet, but directionally I lean that way. Obviously, you can hold out and see if any 10s reappear. That's an option for you as well. But I think the Steelers are a valuable bet today. David Van Patten says, weather going to be an issue in this game. It is the coldest of the games. I wouldn't necessarily call it an issue, especially with both these teams pretty acclimated to this type of climate. But it is the coldest. And I would agree that of all the games this weekend, this is the one that would see the largest weather impact just because of the actual temperature. Although I don't think that it's necessarily all that meaningful for this game. From a props perspective, I watched the prop show with Hitman yesterday. Someone had asked about Isaiah Likely, which I really, you have to go out on a limb here to bet Isaiah Likely at 29.5 receiving yards right now, based off of where we've seen him in recent weeks. But I do really think that this shapes up to be a heavy 2 tight end type of game for the Ravens. And not necessarily just Likely, but Likely and Andrews do have pretty plus matchups, I would say, in this game. So I think some alts are possibly in play for either of those guys. If you wanted to take a look there as well, that's something that factors into the equation for me today based off of that offense. On the other side of things, I don't really know what to make of the Steelers offense right now from a props perspective. That's why I'm kind of sitting out, especially in the running game. TJ Warren's been losing snaps to Cordero Patterson. No idea what's going on there. I don't think that's going to be the case moving forwards into the playoffs, but it could be. But I don't know how that backfield is going to shape up. I originally was going to gravitate towards Freiermuth, but I think his numbers now have they flipped basically to where he was a valuable play for a long time and has now become a little bit inflated. So if anything, I look towards the under there as well, but not super ecstatic about the prop market, not even for this game, but most of the games this week. But Likely was the guy that stood out to me as could potentially have a game that is well above expectations. One other thing to note here, I also talked about the overrating. I think people think I'm trying. My vocabulary is not great. Had too much to drink last night. I need to get a coffee in me. But if we look at Lamar's playoff games historically, he does run the ball a ton. He's ran the ball 8 times in every single playoff game. the Steelers defend this really well. They defend mobile quarterbacks really well. The last couple of years, they've kind of kept Lamar in check. I mean, 3 of the 6 playoff games, Lamar's had 100 yards or more. So he will definitely put it up. I would look for that as an in-game market as well and look to play some Lamar alts if you really see the Ravens invested in running the ball early on in this. Okay. Before we get to our next game, it's the NFL playoffs. They're here. There's no better place to get in on the action than Fanduel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place any $5 bet. It's any $5 bet, you get $200 guaranteed in bonus bets. You can use your bets on spreads, props, live bets, including to catch a pass, over-unders, and so much more. I'm a big fan of Fanduel. It's a very consistent product. Great options available to bettors out there. And for me, I'm big in the product space, have been my entire life. I love mobile apps and websites that are easy to use, navigate, very few clicks to get a bet in. Big fan of Fanduel all around. So just visit fanduel.com/forwardprogress. Download America's #1 sportsbook. That's fanduel.com/forwardprogress. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. For Kansas in affiliation with Kansas Star Casino, 18 plus and present in DC. First online real wager money only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets, which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts. Call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Jeffrey says, Pizza Man, turn on the heat in your place. You look cold. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm absolutely roasting. This was a huge mistake to put this on. It is quite cold and was this morning. I went to let the dog out before the show. The air, drifted in. I'm like, I got it. And now I am just like a pool. This I'm actually going to probably just throw this out afterwards. I don't even think there's any salvaging this at this point. No salvaging this. By the way, I did the responsible gaming read at the end there. I do want to say that is pretty important this week. If you pissed away some money on Texas last night trying to fade the public or whatever, you're trying to get it back all today, that's not the way to do it. Think of sports as a long-term game. Don't go nuts with the games today at this point. Seriously, bet within your limits. Nothing worse than starting off 2025 by getting cooked, by betting and then betting too much. Bet within your limits. Have some fun. All right. Have you considered not drinking? I have. It's whatever. It's not like I'm whatever. Whatever. Not an alcoholic. I can very much easily not drink. But sometimes you got to Ohio State, Texas on. You want to have a couple brews, a couple pops. Why not? Enjoy the experience. Third game on the board is going to be our first game on Sunday. Broncos, Bills. Don't have much of a feel for this game other than that I was very puzzled by the amount of under money that this was taking earlier in the week. Didn't really get that, and I kind of was holding off because of weather reports in Buffalo, seeing what was going to happen. Never looked like it was going to be windy, never looked like it was going to be bad precipitation during the game, and we've seen the market come all the way back in on this over as the week has gone on, and I cannot disagree with that. I'll start with the Broncos offense. Probably surprising if you had looked at the Broncos or thought about the Broncos and not realized how good their offense has been recently. 7 straight games, they've scored at least 24 points. Now, I'm not super sold on the Bills' defense, even at full health. By the way, both these teams completely healthy today. Nothing to worry about. But there is a path to success for the Bills D because Denver doesn't have the best running game, and the Bills could drop guys into coverage, try to limit the big plays to Courtland Sutton, Marvin Mims, keep everything in front of them. And some teams have absolutely killed the Bills when they've done that because they've just ran it down their throat and they've killed them with screens and stuff like that. I don't know that the Broncos are necessarily going to be the team that is going to be able to just run it down their throat if Buffalo plays that way. But I do think that they will have at least some moderate success. And that's what you'd be looking for when you're betting, especially the over at this number at this point. The Bills give up more yardage and success than people realize, even when they're fully healthy. It's kind of been how they've run their defense under Sean McDermott. It's very bend but don't break. Teams move down the field. They tighten up in the red zone. They've been a very good, not a very good red zone defense, but they get a lot of stops when they're in there. So I'm looking for like a moderate success type of game for Denver. If they do get into a trailing game state, as the point spread suggests, then it's all up in the air and you get like your huge variance with Bo Nix. He probably will scramble a little bit more. He'll probably force some more passes downfield as well. And that can go any number of ways. But I do think the point spread is accurate. The Bills are going to score. I mean, they score on pretty much everyone. I do think the Broncos defense is pretty overrated. I've mentioned it this week, but whenever they've gone on the road and they've taken a step up in class, whether it was the Bengals, the Chargers, the Ravens, they gave up a lot of points in those games. They blitz at a very high rate, which is not the way, in my opinion, to beat Josh Allen. I do think that they probably will continue to do that, and they'll play a lot of man coverage on the outside. The Bills don't have like a bona fide stud receiver, but they can beat man coverage across the board. And there's weaknesses outside of Patrick Surtain as well. It's not like, these amazing cover corners across the board. So we'll see. New England did have some success playing a lot of man coverage against Buffalo a few weeks back. I think Denver will try to replicate that with their personnel, but ultimately I don't think it's going to be enough. Also, man coverage will allow Josh Allen to go off a little bit more if they go that route. I'm not sure that they will go that route, but that's something to keep an eye on. The Broncos have a very light defensive front. Sumo was mentioning this on the Best Bet show this week as well. And the Bills are number one in the league in the usage of a sixth offensive lineman. They like to go heavy at times as well. I do think that even if the Denver pass defense is working, the Bills can do a lot of damage on the ground in this particular game and utilize some play action to work off of that as well. So tough one for me on the spread. I think it's fine. I always thought it kind of had to be in this range. But I do think this is a game that's conducive to points. Listen, like now just taking a look at the market, FanDuel's high at 48.5 actually, but there are some 47.5 out there. I don't think that's the end of the world. Props perspective with the spread and just generally the way that this game is most likely to play out, I would be, this, and by the way, I give credit where credit is due. I listen to pretty much everything Hitman says from a props perspective. This is his bread and butter. He breathes it. His prop service did great this year. His prop shows here on Forward Progress were outstanding this year. He really pays attention to a lot of the nuances that regular guys don't pay attention to. But if the Denver gets into heavy pass situations, they do trust Javonte Williams much more in pass protection than their other backs. Now, I think that means that Audric Estime takes the biggest hit. I don't want to bet Javonte Williams overs. I'm kind of done with doing that. He's not very good. Even if he sees snaps, he just doesn't get yardage. Doesn't happen. But Audric Estime unders, I know people love the guy and they've been trying to back him all year. Those seem like much more realistic to me, both in the rushing props or even in rushing attempts type of situation. If you're someone who likes Buffalo in the game, that would be something that I think certainly stands out based off of the way that they've rotated their backs in pass protection. Additionally, in this game, actually, you know what? I'm not going to go anywhere else. I do want to just focus on one other thing. Maybe I'll save it for Green Bay Philly. I'll save it for Green Bay Philly because I think there's certain prop looks across the entire league that apply this week. Let's do it. Green Bay Philadelphia, our next game on the board here. And I'll talk about a prop angle at the end of this. If I forget, which my memory is like really, really poor, just remind me. So market is settled in here at 5. FanDuel's a 5.5. Total is sitting at 45.5. Roughly average across the board. Now, my projected spread in the game is based off of Jordan Love being at full health. It's really hard for me to quantify what his elbow injury might mean. That's an extreme challenge. It's a lot easier to do that with Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts coming off of a concussion. There is a pretty decent sample of quarterbacks returning from a concussion and a performance downgrade in the first game back. That's factored into my number. It happens very regularly. That's not to say Hurts is completely incapable of having a big game. It's just to say that historically, first game back off of a concussion, and remember, this is a multi-week concussion, cleared protocol this week, that there's been a performance hit to that. Now, the Packers defense, in my opinion, is overrated, I would say. People give them a lot more credit than I think that they deserve, but there's like real ways to attack them. One of them is a lot of in-breaking routes and crossing routes. If you look at the success that their divisional opponents, Detroit and Minnesota, had in those games against Green Bay, they ran a lot of crossers, got a lot of yards after catch. Green Bay really did not have an answer for that. That's not really the way that Philly runs their offense. And Jalen Hurts isn't the guy that can really run that type of offense. So I think the Packers have that working in their favor. In addition, Green Bay has been really good against the run. And that is one way to really slow down the Eagles' rush offense. And by the way, I don't know where this started. Again, this is like classic content creator stuff, just like looking at yardage totals and saying, well, Saquon Barkley had a great game week 1 against the Packers. Saquon Barkley did not have a great game week 1 against the Packers. That game was played in Brazil. Barkley had one big run in that game. It's like 35 yards. He went 24 of 109. If you actually remove that run, he went 23 for 75. That's 3.3 yards per carry. The Eagles as a whole had a 35% success rate running the ball. Jalen Hurts even got shut down, 13 carries for 33. So there is a very clear path to success. Okay, good point. Brutal bad field. Don't count it. I'm going to. Because Green Bay's played so many games this year where they've shut down the opposing back. Now, again, you have to think probabilistically. Of course, there is a route to Saquon having a big game. The team basically got a bye last week. They rested every key player. That's impactful for this particular game as well. But I don't see this as being the shootout that it was in Brazil back in week 1. On the other side, Green Bay is going to struggle offensively in all likelihood. Packers offense without Christian Watson, they really lack an explosive downfield threat that can create space. That's going to be a problem because the Eagles have the corners that can challenge these receivers. They will press them. The way that the Packers are going to have to move the ball is incrementally down the field with Josh Jacobs, Tucker Kraft, shorter routes. And Jordan Love has historically not been the guy that can do that. Love, EPA, through the roof, success rate, no. And that's just very reliant on big plays. It is hard to generate the big plays against this Fangio defense. They don't give up a lot of them. I really I could see a path to success where the Philly D just completely shuts down the Green Bay offense in this game. And even if their offense doesn't look great, they could win something along the lines of 24-13, 24-10. Honestly, there could be a shootout. I don't think it's going to happen just because of the lack of explosiveness on the Green Bay offensive side, but we will see. I think this remains to be one of the more interesting games of the week, but the market has definitely pushed Philadelphia up here, and I can see why. With the uncertainty with Love's throwing elbow, always an issue, I would be concerned about that as well. So this prop angle I wanted to talk about, and listen, here's one of the challenges of doing content. Like, I might talk about something this year, it's not there next year or whatever. And honestly, no, it's not guaranteed money by any stretch of the imagination. But what I will say is a lot of these playoff games, if you chart them historically, you will see that more players get carries. And here's where I'm going with it. A lot of these games, there's third down plays that are set up, fourth down plays that are set up, and even just plays that are set up in the early going to get wide receivers involved, where they will hand the ball off to wide receivers on like these jet sweep type of plays. So you think about this across the league. Jaden Reed is one for the Green Bay Packers, where if you looked at Jaden Reed and you looked at just his game log, you'd be like, wow, yeah, like why would I want to bet a rushing over on Jaden Reed? He's probably not going to get a carry. Well, historically, we know that in the playoffs, when the games are on the line and it could be one and done, that you tend to see these players get more involved. Guys like Puka Nacua with the Rams. Think through all these teams here and who's most likely to be a wide receiver to get a carry. And in my opinion, it's way more likely than not that they will. So you're getting guys that are priced at like a half yard, 1.5 yards in the rushing yardage market that are wide receivers. And to me, I don't like to say like blindly throw darts, but I think if you were to blindly bet these players this week towards the overs, you would have a good week. You could obviously lose. This is based off of historical analysis. I'm not in the head of every single offensive coordinator or head coach in the league, but this is something you tend to see come playoff time. Keep that in mind when you're betting this type of stuff this week. Maybe there's an angle there for you in particular. Outside of that, I know it's kind of been beaten to death ad nauseum, but with Jair Alexander not on the shelf, AJ Brown's reception numbers seem low to me at 5.5. It's nothing like crazy that I would go out and bet right away, but there's no shutdown corner for Green Bay, and that's going to be a problem. You'd also want to take a look at Green Bay's secondary and see if Evan Williams plays tomorrow. I think he's a very underrated player. He's been dealing with a quad injury. He's been inactive the past 3 weeks. Part of the reason why you'd want to keep an eye on that is Zane Anderson, his backup, is out with a concussion as well. So that's just one thing there. But yeah. Actually, I said LaFleur will prefer sweeps, especially with the Love injury. I hope so. I'm invested in this stuff this week. So hopefully we get those types of looks. But I do believe that those are quite valuable in playoff games. And at some point, there'll be an overcorrection. I don't think we've seen that quite yet. All right, Sunday Night Football. I'll be on air for this game. A reminder, I'm on air tonight, Pittsburgh and Baltimore. I won't be wearing this. It's way too hot of this thing. It's not happening again. But I am on air for every primetime game this week here on Forward Progress. Set notifications. Join me. I'll give props before the game. Plus, I'll talk about the game. Plus, we'll watch the game live. We got a banger crew of guests this week for Wildcard Weekend as well. But tomorrow's game, Washington and Tampa, I will have a rooting interest. I did bet a little bit of Tampa Bay in this game. I think it is a pretty solid matchup for the Bucs. Market's just been hanging on 3 for a while now. Seen some fluctuations in the juice in this game. I directionally lean towards the under here as well, which might seem like a very uncommon opinion for this game. Market is pretty much 50.5. Some spots showing a 50 right now. For me, this is about the Washington offensive efficiency, which has gone downhill as the season has worn on. They're running the ball a lot more than they were earlier on in the year. They're not having success doing so. I know Hitman talked about Austin Eckler possibly getting more involved in this game. I like that look from a prop perspective. Rush plus receiving. I do think Brian Robinson's left a lot to be desired in these recent weeks. But ultimately, you look at Washington since the midpoint of the season, and they're basically slightly above league average in EPA. They're still a top 10 success rate team, but it's a far cry from where they were to start the season. Injuries have played a factor, certainly. Jaden Daniels got banged up midseason as well. But more and more tape on a rookie quarterback, more and more tendencies, and sometimes that just happens as the season progresses. Early in the year, they were killing it in short yardage, and they kind of still are. I mean, you look at this offense this year, if they can get into short yardage situations, they've been very good in those. But lately, what's been happening is the early down success rate has been much lower. They're not finding the bigger gains on early downs, and that's just hurt them as a whole. And early down success rate, much more predictive of late down success rate. I think that's a big factor. Additionally, a big factor in this game, Tampa's run defense, as the year has gone on, is getting better and better and better. Obviously, they have one of the best run-stopping nose tackles in the game in Vita Vea. They do not give up much on early downs. Third best success rate against runs on early downs. I don't think this is a good path for Washington here to find themselves in those third and manageable types of situations. And if we look at Washington as a whole in these recent weeks, we've seen teams with decimated secondaries. Dallas last week, New Orleans, that Washington is struggling to move the ball against. Like that game that they blew to New Orleans, almost blew, I should say, because New Orleans had the 2-point conversion late in the game. Washington should have ran that team into the ground with the amount of personnel that was missing for the Saints offensively. Obviously, the injuries in the secondary, plus trading Lattimore to Washington, and they didn't do that. Antoine Winfield being back in this game is going to be huge against Jaden Daniels' scrambles. He'll play closer to the line. I mean, it's pretty impactful. And in fact, it's pretty much all positive in the Tampa Bay secondary this week as well. Jamel Dean got in a full practice on Friday. Mike Edwards got in a full practice on Friday. And then offensively, Kate Otten got back-to-back full practices as well. Let's assume Marshawn Lattimore is at full health. He'll give Mike Evans a battle on the outside. That's just an assumption. He had a soft tissue injury, missed several weeks. That could be a problem. First game back, it often is. But Tampa can run the ball on this Washington front. I was talking with Suma about this. The Bucs run a lot of pull concepts in their running game. Washington is one of the worst teams in the league at defending that. They're just one of the worst teams in the league at defending the run. And that's a big issue. Outside of Lattimore at corner, they have no one who can cover McMillan. That is a big issue. My biggest concern is that Baker at times can get pretty, dicey, I guess, when he faces man coverage. Washington does play a lot of man coverage, and Baker will force throws into man coverage, but Washington just doesn't have a good secondary outside of Lattimore, so I would be concerned with that as well. His teams played each other in week 1 as well. Another NFC rematch of week 1. Tampa, 6.4 yards per play against this Washington D. Now, obviously, Chris Godwin was healthy at that time, but since Godwin's left, McMillan has emerged as a very good receiver. Rachaad White also had 15 carries for 31 yards in that game. That was the part of the season where the Bucs were just plodding with Rachaad White and wasting downs on him. And now Bucky Irving is big into the mix. You guys know me. I bet Washington a lot earlier this year. I don't say you guys know me. There's a lot of people watching who might be watching for the first time, but I'm just very down on this team right now. And I like Tampa Bay stylistically on both sides of the ball in this game. Obviously, the Bucs defense isn't anything to write home about, but Todd Bowles against a rookie quarterback, pretty strong in those types of situations historically as well. So that's where I'm going. Bart asks, Eckler alt receptions market. Love that look, honestly. Especially if they're trailing in the game, he could get a lot of look overall. I think Eckler is the guy to target. And then if Eckler ends up not having a good game, we all just tweet at Hitman and we blame him for his Eckler look. Thoughts on Baker rushing prop? He's not one of the... So obviously Baker has a tendency to run and will. He'll break pocket if he's under pressure. He'll lay it all out on the line. But for me, because of my position on the game, where I like the Bucs here, I'd be less inclined to bet Baker rushing overs. I think that's something you want to do if you directionally lean towards the Commanders more so. Because in these types of games, and especially with this type of run defense, I could see the Bucs being pretty run heavy overall. So I'm not super enthused about that, although that could happen. We're all down for blaming Hitman, John Smith. We're all down for blaming Hitman. Extra said that could be a good SGP angle. Edge, excuse me. It sure can be. All right, before we get into Monday Night Football here, smash that like button down below if you haven't already. It goes a long way to people finding our content. And if you're listening in audio form, which you can this week, 5 stars. I won't accept anything less. Final game, Monday Night Football. Vikings and Rams. Big news here, obviously, is the game has been moved to Arizona because of the fires in LA. Thoughts and prayers out to anyone who was affected by those. Just a pretty devastating situation. It's really sad to see that kind of stuff happen. But this game will be moved. That is a big break for Minnesota, as they will likely have more of their fans in attendance for this game than the Rams will. And that's why you see the reopener where it was of Minnesota minus 2.5. And as it stands right now, that's pushing towards 3. I likely will not get involved in this game because I am actually not sure how to quantify this field all that much. We do have past instances before of games getting moved for other reasons, but they're such small sample that I don't really know what to do here. Let's start with Minnesota's offense. I don't want to say I don't see. Let me choose these words carefully. I think Minnesota's offense has a big advantage in the passing game, in particular here. But they also have Sam Darnold. And I don't know if short-term memory is a thing or if this is the sign of something that is going to be continuous in high-pressure spots. Darnold was terrible last week. He did face some pressure from the Lions' defensive front. He also just missed a bunch of throws, deer in the headlights type of game. The Rams can push Minnesota's interior offensive line up front. They can probably stop the run here as well, but they don't have the corners to play against these Vikings receivers. The first matchup between these teams was really interesting. I was watching it earlier this week. Minnesota, first 2 possessions, scored with ease. Touchdown. Boom. 5 of their next 7 possessions, 14 yards or less. The offense was horrible. They lost Christian Darrisaw in that game. They never seemed comfortable offensively after that. Losing starting left tackle in game, big deal. I would be understating this if I said to you I have no idea what to expect out of Minnesota's offense this week. If this game was played last week and we hadn't seen Minnesota-Detroit, I would be so confident in Minnesota moving the ball through the air, but I cannot unsee that game, and we do have to account for that game. We can't just you can say it was an anomaly. Maybe it doesn't matter. That's your prerogative, but it has to be factored in. And Darnold absolutely stunk up the joint. The other side, the Rams offense. I think people think of the Rams offense in like some way where they're this elite offense. I noticed this when I'm talking with my friends about this game this weekend. I think they have like a lot of good fantasy players. They don't. The Rams offense isn't that good. They don't score. Like, fundamentally, they're not scoring points. You can point to earlier in the year and be like, well, Nakua injured, Cup coming up. I mean, with both those guys on the field, they've cleared 21 points 4 times in 10 games. And one of those games went to overtime. They're not scoring. Is that going to change? Well, they had a bye week, essentially, last week. By the way, looking around the league at all the players that got injured, Jordan Love, Jaden Daniels nursing. I didn't even talk about Jaden Daniels' leg injury. But Rams getting a bye week, not that bad in hindsight. McVay choosing to rest starters. We go back to the game that they played against Minnesota, though, and the Rams moved the ball really well in that game. Drives of 63, 65, 25, 39, 34, 75, 54, 35. They were moving it. Every single drive, they picked up yardage. I don't know what that Brian Flores game plan was, but it was one of the worst this season for them. I think what you will see here is Minnesota has been a heavy zone team this year. They have blitzed a lot, and they've played a lot of zone. And Stafford cooked that zone defense when he was getting blitzed. I would be surprised if you see the same thing. Minnesota, when they played Green Bay, played a lot more man coverage. I think that they'll do that this time around. And the reason why I think that might be successful is because outside of Nakua, the rest of these wide receivers, including Kupp, are not very good at the point of attack right now, struggling to generate separation. So I think you might see more man coverage, heavy dose of blitzing, and that might be a factor. Outside of that, you have the unknown element of the wildfires. I don't know what the Rams prep has looked like this week. Obviously, I would think that just being human beings, that would impact you in some way, being around it, knowing people from that area. But this is now getting into the territory of subjective analysis, narrative-based. It's not what I like to do. I like to try to quantify things as much as possible. So for me, I think that this ends up just being a complete pass overall. I don't hate the idea of Vikings alternate lines, even though I directionally lean towards the Rams right now, because I think that there is this fat tail outcome where, okay, the home field dynamic is not that the Rams were going to have a huge home field anyways, but this is switched in a big way. There is an off-field distraction, and there is one team that I think fundamentally has good matchups against the other team. I just can't pull the trigger because I don't trust their quarterback. But if that does happen, I do think that there's a fat tail outcome. Okay, few things here I want to get to in the chat. Birdie says Darnold struggled in the red zone. The overreaction to last week for Darnold is epic. Yeah, I don't know. Like it's the problem is that it's all year it's been easy, and then that was a big game. Like you're playing for a bye. That's a playoff game. And it's not like he just missed throws. He didn't see throws. It did very much seem like the Darnold of old. It could very well be an overreaction, but there could be signal there as well. Worst spot of the year for the Vikes the first time around, Thursday road game after playing Detroit. Great point. Really good point as well. Jason says Rams teasers still good, ? So I assume everyone, I'm not going to make the assumption. I'll just talk about Wong teasers really quickly. If you're new here and you don't know what a Wong teaser is, you can look it up after the show's done. Essentially, you want to capture 3 and 7 when you tease, whether that's teasing a team down as a favorite or up as an underdog. You typically want to do it in games that have lower totals because there's going to be less variance. The reason you do that, 3-7, the most common final scores or margins of victory in the NFL. So there's something called a Wong teaser. There are people like Simon Hunter who don't believe in math anymore and the Wong teasers don't exist. These people are idiots. It is a very small edge nowadays because sportsbooks will charge you more and more to play this type of teaser. But with this particular game, and to answer this question from Jason, the whole notion of a Wong teaser is you want to play those in games where you expect there to be less variance. And to me, this is a high variance game because of the venue switch and off the field stuff. So I don't love that. The people who played the early teasers on Ravens Bills, I think that was a very smart move. I wouldn't feel as confident in going Bills and Rams. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't. If you're getting like minus 120, you do have a small edge there, assuming that the closing line closes in this range. But that's another problem here, is we're seeing the market push out towards the Vikings. And if this ends up closing to 3, you're holding a teaser that's kind of underwater, where you didn't get the greatest value. So I don't love it. I've never been like the biggest teaser player. I will play some, but I'm really, really looking for cases where I think that there's not a ton of variance. Like you get the Chiefs, and this is just a random example, Chiefs minus 8.5, 7.5 against anyone. Yeah, I'm probably going to tease that down because you know what the Chiefs do? They win games all the time. Those are the spots that I love relative to the Rams, who I think there is a blowout potential in this game. All right. I think that's going to be it for me. A reminder, primetime watch-alongs this week. Tonight, I'm back, 8 p.m. Eastern time. Actually, let me just double-check that. The game starts at 8, so we're going to have to go live at like 7:45. Hopefully, the Chargers-Texans game wraps up. Basically, after the Chargers-Texans game wraps up, I'm going live for Pittsburgh-Baltimore. I'll talk through more props for that tonight. And then tomorrow night, Bucs-Commanders, Monday night. Make sure you're subbed here on Forward Progress. Smash that like button. We still got time before the games start. We don't have Texans-Chargers until 4:30. Please share this out. If you stuck with me for the full hour today and you enjoyed the content, just do me one favor. Find a friend that might benefit from this type of content. I bet on the NFL for a living. This is my bread and butter. I take pride in giving real analysis of games, not just straight up BS of public bet splits and trends that are irrelevant. Please share this out if you can. There is a share button on YouTube. And of course, we are set up for live in 7 hours tonight as well. I see your donation here, Kenny. I really, really, really appreciate it. Let's talk about Chargers wide receiver 3 today, Simi Fehoko. I know him very well from his time with the Cowboys. I mean, the reality is that's a problem, right, for the Chargers against this secondary group. The Texans can cover. They have a very good defensive head coach. Remember, Darius Davis, DJ Chark are also in the mix there as well. Quentin Johnston was dealing with the illness. He's very likely going to play. It's just Josh Palmer out there. Appreciate the $20 donation, though, Kenny. It does go a long way for us being able to pay our producers. Okay. Chark, I don't think he's there. He's there. He might not see the field. All right. That's it for me. Thank you very much for tuning in. This has been the Pizza Buffet Wildcard Edition here on Forward Progress, presented by Fanduel. I hope everyone has a great day betting football. Obviously, bet within your limits. I'll see you back here tonight, 7:45 p.m. Eastern time. Peace out, everyone. Enjoy the games.